So Tim Mould and I are actually former colleagues. We worked together at Accenture for several years, and Tim's been there a bit longer than me. He's one of the leaders in Accenture's higher ed practice, and his career is focused on the intersection of strategy, technology, and operations. He's spent about 15 years in the high tech industry, but about 10 of that, last 10 years specifically in higher ed. And you can see some of his experience there, recent work on the screen. Really pleased that Tim agreed to spend time with us today and talk about this topic. We're all interested in hearing how to address innovation. So Tim, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks again.
Thank you, David. Yeah, my connection to this group, I worked with David, John Thompson Haas. I think Matt heard me speak to the audience at ASU GSV this year around an innovative program for a 2-year program to grant associate's degrees in essentially a 24-month program targeted towards underrepresented students that's actually housed within Loyola University of Chicago. And so after hearing that, Matt, John, and David and I talked, and I thought it might be good if we talk. We're going to be focusing today on some research and some thinking that we've done at Accenture most recently in today's world. One caveat I might make is that, like everyone else, I've been introduced as next to my name, it says thought leader. I kind of think about myself as my client referred to me last week as a thought partner. And I welcome you to share your thoughts, experiences, because the thinking that we all have to do in this space is what's going to drive innovation and education and the exchange of ideas. So whether that be during the Q&A session here, or you want to engage me or my colleague, Samantha Fisher, who was instrumental in this research, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd like to start this with a story that, true story, takes us back to March 12th of this year, in which I received a phone call from my son, Josh, who is a sophomore in college. And that phone call was surprising for a couple of reasons. Well, one, because being a sophomore in college, he never calls his parents proactively. That's one. Two is usually when we hear from him, it's a text asking us to transfer some money to his account. So it was surprising from that respect, but I think we all remember where we were when we first heard the news that it became real and the pandemic affected our lives, whether it be a loved one got COVID, or in our case, Josh called us up and said, "Dad, I need you to come and get me. The campus is closing, and I need you to come get me by Sunday, March 15th, which now forever, the Ides of March will have a very personal meaning for us and for me and for Josh. So fortunately, he finished out the semester like the rest of the college students across the country remotely. And then fortunately, we got the news in July that his university would be returning to campus with all of the caveats of testing and the like. But we were a little bit wondering, okay, what's that experience going to be like as parents of a college student? And sure enough, 5 months after I got that phone call from Josh, he went back to campus. And so that's the world we live in. He's now experiencing, as all college students this year have experienced, college education unlike any that we've ever seen. So a couple of facts that I think might be interesting for us as we delve into the research. One is something we probably all heard, which is that according to the Department of Education, right, before the pandemic, only about a third of college students had really taken an online course for credit. And so that meant 2/3, right, were taking courses, doing their academic coursework through traditional means and lecture halls, labs, and the like. So what that meant, given Josh's situation, is life was changing. And the question is, in our minds, is changing for just now? When's the pandemic going to be over? Is it changing for good? And so my colleagues and I at Accenture, we decided, okay, let's go talk to some higher education leaders. And so what we did is we put together an interview guide, and we went out and talked to higher education leaders across the country, primarily presidents, provosts, chancellors, VPs, deans, large, small institutions, public, private, associate degree granting institutions, and R1s. And essentially we asked, what boils down to two questions. One is, what are you doing to deal with today's world? And if you could look in your crystal ball, what do you think will stick? So those are the two questions I want to go through what we heard from them, and then share with you some thinking about what that means going forward. And then I definitely welcome questions and comments about your experiences. So what did they say? So when we read these three quotes on the screen, I go back to the old axiom, which one of these things is not like the other? So if you look at the top one and the bottom one, something in common. We took aggressive action. We wouldn't have done this without the pandemic. Well, I think we all know there's some things that some universities have taken advantage of the crisis and done some things they probably were thinking about anyway, but still aggressive. They overcame the inertia. And the bottom one was, some were dramatic and they said, okay, how you receive education, the educational experience is going to change forever. And then we also heard from these same leaders, had to reconcile that with, our students want to be here. They still want to be on campus. They still want to be in person. And so we had to roll around in the conversations with quotes and conversations around these topics. Then we delve a little bit deeper. What did some universities do to deal with this? Well, we had one, right? There was testing and all of that, right? There was a recognition, and I think we all can relate to this in our jobs. There's a recognition of connectedness and community is important, and particularly in the undergraduate experiences, people are building their networks and becoming, fully actualized or trying to achieve that, right? And so this one university we talked to, right, they built an engagement tool to help students connect with their peers in new ways and network and build social interactions they might otherwise have. And so that was one, they called that the Student Hub. Two, they changed certainly the academic environment was going to change, right? We have the constraints of social distancing, but students wanting to be in person and learning, right? So they created a tool that allowed the students to preference by week for every class, whether they wanted to be in person or remote. And then they had an algorithm went through that allowed that if there was going to be too many people in a class and that was going to break the social distancing guidelines for that classroom, they would be able to prioritize students based upon, whether or not they had a lot of classes last week in person or not. And then they also decided they also restricted people from preferencing if they had a negative test, they didn't show up for their mandatory test, and the like. So this was a way in which they used the digital world in order to bring some connectedness, both in the classroom and outside. Another example, which I don't have a slide for, but I'll talk through with you, which I thought was kind of interesting, was one of the universities we talked to sponsored an in-person, socially distanced activity around each session was a topic of interest that would spark conversation. And they said, students, tell your stories, and then around this topic, and the topic might have been, okay, how to connect with others in our world. It might be something like experiences of racism, which we all have been experiencing, the world and the discussion and the like, and this was a way to get that discussion going. And so what they found is this was a way, not digital, but in person, to bring the community, to build community, have students interact and the like, and connect. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting way, because, and it was, they were oversold. And so they just were, the attendance was amazing. Students wanted to connect. So what does this all mean? These quotes, some of these experiences. Well, I give you the answer in 3 parts. We dug deeper. And I would say one of our conclusions, and it's interviews, right? So you all have been there, right? When you participate in interview-based research, right? You roll through the data, you're trying to figure out exactly what you find. But what we came out of this was COVID and the environment that our students have been living in over the past 6 to 9 months it's illuminated where it's shown a bright light on where student interactions are needed and where they're valued and where they're not. And let's give some examples. And these, I think, will generate some interesting discussion based upon everyone's experience. But this is some of the things that we heard. So, you know, the activity like I just gave about building connectedness, talking about students talking about personal experiences, sharing them with their colleagues at school. That's certainly one. Organized clubs and activities. Greek life. Graduation. Everybody wants an in-person graduation, right? And then, you know, varsity, intramural sports. These are all things, right, that it was clear, the message was clear from the leaders that said, we hear students, they want to socialize and build community. And then it was interesting, there were some other activities that maybe they didn't necessarily need in-person interaction, but they still valued remote interaction. And these are things you might expect, and there's a couple surprises in here, at least for me. But as I thought about it, I'm like, I can get that. So one is, you know, administration type activities. What they were hearing from students is, I don't need to go to the bursar's office or in order to resolve my bill, or a registrar. I don't need to be there in person. Career services, and that was kind of interesting. I don't need to be in person. I still want to talk to somebody and engage with an individual about my situation, but I can do that remotely. It's okay during Zoom. Academic advising, tutoring. That one's kind of debatable, right? Because there's a connection, right, between learner and teacher. But still, that was one that kind of came up and said, well, that may be one. And then the last one was kind of surprising, was mental health. The students who wanted to engage in mental health, they were okay with telehealth. And the way we kind of rationalized this as we thought about it and we talked to leaders was, these are all, can be at times stressful, create anxiety situations. Students don't necessarily want to be seen go into the mental health wing of the student center, or wherever that may be. And so we kind of characterized it as It's like when they have to sit in a room with an adult, quote unquote adult, an administrator or professional, they preferred the interaction over video is what was bubbling up. And so this is an area where, okay, maybe these types of services, maybe these types of things, we don't need to have in-person interaction. In person, we still want to connect with people, but somehow students feel like they want to engage, but not in person. So that was kind of interesting. Secondly, are on the academic side. So 90% of the leaders we talked to said they expected that the student experience would change academically, and that students would be more tolerant and have actually in some cases, be able to engage more fully in a remote or online experience, such that perhaps a quarter to a third in the future, in the post-pandemic world, of the academic environment of a traditional residential college experience might be done remotely or online. I mean, think about the barriers that we've had in the past. The barriers in the past have been, we don't have faculty that are able to do this or create curriculum, or even wanted to do this. But now we've pushed past the inertia. We've crossed the chasm, if you will, to say, okay, we can do this. And what that does, right, is that creates shakes up a new cocktail of modalities with the proliferation of programs that we've all seen over the past 5 to 10 years. And so coming to grips with that, I think, is going to be one of the challenges for universities, because we've all seen the data from like Burning Glass that says, okay, these degree programs that were created, the data that I saw from Burning Glass, degree programs that were created in the 2013, 2014 timeframe, by 2018, there were a huge chunk of them that had not graduated at least 10 students. Now, there's lots of reasons for programs to push thinking and the like, but it does speak to that the modality piece is here to stay. At least that's what we heard. Now that remains to be seen. We were in the middle of the pandemic. If life returns to quote unquote normal with a vaccine, maybe that changes, but that's what we heard. And finally, think about what this means for traditional students and non-traditional students. From a non-traditional student background, that point that I made before is we have created a faculty base now and a potential offering base that can expand the offerings that we might traditionally offer online, that any higher ed institution might offer online. And so those learners, there's new potential there on the non-traditional side. On the traditional side, you push the envelope of time to graduation, and the value prop for them. Okay, maybe I can graduate sooner, and that pushes the envelope on, is it a 4-year degree or is it a 3-year degree? So kind of final thoughts. I think, our conclusion is this is going to force us all. We could always say in the past, okay, the traditional residential experience is different. than the online experience. And now it's blurred. But what it does allow us to do is be purposeful about what we know is going to add value and be impactful to students, both on the academic side and the non-academic side, so that we can deliver a student experience that adds value in person, where it makes an impact, and then potentially pull back on those areas that that doesn't add value, or be creative in the way we deliver it. And so that's essentially the summary of my thoughts, our thoughts, based on the research we did. I would really be remiss if I did not recognize my colleague, Samantha Fisher. She is our North American strategy lead. She led many of the interviews with us. She did a lot of the synthesis of the data. There were some late nights there rolling through things. We can be reached on LinkedIn and email. And so put some provocative thoughts out there. I'd love to get some discussion going and get some questions.
Thank you, Tim. That's really fascinating, your findings. And I think surprising to a lot of people that would have predicted one result from all this, right? We have a few clients and we talked to a lot of schools that have successfully managed to bring students back, deliver a lot of their education online, and everything be working well and smoothly, right? I mean, kind of surprisingly so. My daughter, actually, similar to your son, she was a senior this past year for May graduation. She had to have a virtual graduation, and she decided instead of trying to find a job, that she would go to graduate school. She was also a student athlete, and as you may know, spring athletes were given an extra year of eligibility by the NCAA. So she decided to go find a place to play a fifth year of softball. So she went to a graduate program where she could play softball and do a graduate degree. It's a 1.5-year program. So all of her classes she's in DC going to school. All classes are virtual, but she's practicing with her team, getting ready for the spring season. And it's going well, right? It's going surprisingly well, which is a good experience. So just to share that anecdote as well. A reminder, we have Q&A open, everyone. Please submit your questions in Q&A and I will field those for Tim.
And David, I love.
Matt, any comments?
The title itself, ushering innovation and yeah, can you guys hear me? I was saying that even the title of ushering in innovation at post-pandemic, that needs to be thought of at every campus, right? The reality of it is we shouldn't have needed a pandemic to think about innovating, right? And so I think that's one of the things that's really important. I appreciate the fact that you're going through this strategy discussion with campuses to allow is we look at a campus has an issue with enrollment drop, or their financial aid packaging is taking too long, or whatever the case is, and they just throw technology. And I'm a technology guy. I put in student systems for 30 years. I won't do that anymore. That's not the way we will work in the post-pandemic. Post-pandemic means let's work with your strategy and then identify the right technology to be very successful, right? And it doesn't mean the way that one university does their strategy and another one, we don't put the same technology in at that stage because they may have different strategies. And that's why, Tim, I did hear your stuff at GSVU, and I appreciate you joining us again here. I'm a big believer that the partners you work with have to be able to talk to you about strategy. If your partners are just telling you about how to move a legacy system and digitize your current processes into a new system, you've just repaved the campus as is. And to be honest, you can't do that anymore, right? And that's why we're doing the summit. I'm so grateful for the time. And you notice I have a soapbox here, but that's exactly what I was listening to as we went.
Well, one thing we've noticed.
I was really struck by something that you said there. You had a slide there that you talked about schools going through and seeing where students wanted interaction and where students didn't really need it. And I was really struck by that do you see them looking at that information and just using it in a, in the current pandemic structure, or are they going to take the opportunity to take this information and really rebuild or retool how they deliver education, how they deliver their value?
So I want to make sure I clarify something that I probably was not clear enough on. These are still points of interaction that they want to interact with somebody. I mean, we can all relate to the experiences we've had probably with our cable company and to use a very simple example, or telephone company where they tried to use IVR or AI in a chat or whatever and we tried to get answers to our questions, and we all figured out our ways of navigating past that, right? Whether it be repeating customer representative over and over again, or nonsensical questions that says, okay, must need that gets by the AI bot. What we heard here was the students still want interaction with their questions, but there's this interesting phenomenon around these four where they didn't want to interact in person. And they didn't feel like they wanted to be in the room. It created, and what they heard was creates anxiety, stress. And so somehow a little, in the digital world, right, we've created this phenomenon with this generation that they feel very comfortable interacting digitally and addressing these questions, which can be very, right, mental health gets about as intrusive as you can get to. So you're going to interact, you're going to do telehealth. That was kind of the thing. And I thought about that, right? And in the experiences that my family has had and what I've heard from my kids, and they're like, Dad, I'm okay. I don't have to go to the office, right? And it's almost as if in that case, right, they may be more willing to engage. And that is one in particular. Where forcing students to walk across the campus and walk into that office in and of itself is probably a barrier. And so I think the idea is to maybe rethink some of the things that we have always thought, okay, I add value by meeting with students in person. I mean, the days, right, we've seen some of this happen in the past with a simple, the pay my tuition bill through the cashier's window. Those days are gone, right? But for a time, we all felt that was the way you do things. And I think what we're hearing is this generation is pushing the envelope again on some of these areas that we might have considered sacrosanct in terms of in-person interaction, because there's a discomfort level, what we call the adult in the room, actually being physically in the room. And so I think that's the piece, the takeaway here is to rethink making at least the opportunity for students to interact and engage. And these are all things that you want students to engage on. How do you get over maybe that 20% that'll have trouble doing that?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Tim. We have one question, which actually is a great segue into the next. One of the things you mentioned about virtual. I think we're finding some things are actually better virtually than they are in person, which is what you're saying, right? And sometimes it's surprising, but it's in some ways it's better, right? It's the student likes it better, they get more value out of it, et cetera. And one of the topics that you brought up as a we don't know yet is virtual advising, right? So the student advisor, one of the things that I've done some work around is, how can we better deliver advising for students, right? So it's not all in person or even over the phone. Can we do it virtually? Have you seen any data on success rates? The question is it more successful virtually, or do you have any data on that, whether in person versus virtually on that?
Well, so that's an interesting question. So in the work we did for Rupe, we talked to a lot, because Arupe is built as a 2-year institution with the objective of those students entering Arupe, getting prepared to finish a 4-year degree in 4 to 5 years. We talked to institutions that have done interesting things with admitting to associate's degree students to finish a 4-year degree. DePaul University in Chicago is an interesting one, right?
Yep.
They started maybe 5 to 10 years back recruiting 2-year associate's degree students across the Midwest. But what they felt was extremely important is targeting those students and providing them advisors when they started their associate's program that would carry through to when they came to DePaul. And that was all remote. And DePaul, if you look at their numbers, I don't have them off the top of my head. I remember when I looked at them back when we were doing this work 15 months ago or so. I mean, the numbers were staggering in terms of the success rate of students doing an associate's degree in Iowa and then at a 2-year community college, and then graduating from DePaul with an accounting degree and going to work for, you name the big 4 accounting firm, right? And so that was a case of matching, remotely, you can better match people's expertise with a student and their desires, in my mind. The important thing is the connection and making sure that the consistency of that connection and the persistence. But I know we're at time.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, we're out of time. I'm going to turn back over to you, Matt. Thank you, Tim, for taking the time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.